Hello, everyone, and welcome to our SpiceWorks Partner Webinar. This session is being brought to you by Scale Computing. I'm David from SpiceWorks, and I'll be your moderator for today. Before we get started, I want to point out a few features about our console. This session is being recorded, so if you step away or miss any portion of today's session, you can view it on demand, and we'll send you a link to view that in about a day. Also, this session is interactive, so we invite all of you to submit your questions using the Q&A widget located on your screen. Those will queue up on our side, and we'll get to as many of those at the end. If we don't get to your question, we will follow up with you after today. Also, Scale has provided some additional information in the handout section, so take a look there to get some more information. Finally, I want to invite everyone to join the attendee chat. You can bring that up using the orange icon button at the bottom of your screen and join your fellow attendees in a conversation. Remember that our chat does follow our community guidelines, and we'd like you, while you chat, please keep things fun and professional. So with that, I'll introduce our speaker from Scale Computing. We have Alan Conboy, Office of the CTO. So with that, Alan, I'll hand it to you to get started.
Well, thanks, David. And all you Spice Heads out there, I just wanted to say thanks for taking some time out of your day to join us here. What I wanted to do was have a conversation with you about PDI, but actually a bigger topic all the way around, kind of a business continuance and business resilience discussion, the pieces that all go into that. And to do that, well, start at the beginning. Let's start with what's changed. Damn near everything. There's an awful lot to unpack just March. Let's face it, the COVID lockdowns, the social distancing, the remediatory steps that we're all having to go through, both personally and professionally, fundamentally changed things pretty much everywhere. New York to San Francisco to Austin to the City of London to the Royal Court of Bahrain. Life is just plain different. Full stop. The real trick here is figuring out which of the changes over the last 6, 7, 8 months, what's permanent? What do we get to step back out of? So let's back up even further. Let's back up the rest of the way to March and take a really close look at what happened. What did we all do? Well, first and foremost, we all were in mad scramble mode. Everybody went with no notification whatsoever, jumped into a reactionary stance. What I mean by that is often as not, people that were taking care of business in the office on Friday got notification Friday night, 20 minutes after they left the office, you're not coming back Monday. We as IT folks, we started jumping through some mad hoops to make things happen. But pretty much right away, within a matter of weeks, life kind of settled down. It slowed down pretty radically. Not to make too much light of it, but we all hoarded toilet paper and started making our own bread and figuring out, how to do the things that we probably should have known how to do all along. And companies, they kind of breathed a collective sigh of relief in some ways because business continued to get done, work continued to get done. So let's unpack for a moment what it was that organizations from an IT perspective did, both the good and the bad, to react to where we've all found ourselves. And foremost, exactly the wrong thing. We turned laptops and Chromebooks, etc., into the toilet paper of the IT world. Laid our hands on every one we could get our hands on. Good luck getting one from CDW or even your local Best Buy. Because the approach that most organizations took was to get portable devices, get as many of them as they could, image them up, get corporate images onto them, get a VPN client onto them, ship them out to a suddenly remote workforce, and cranked open their VPN tunnels to support that, well beyond what VPN was honestly ever really intended for. You know, between the problems we've always had with VPN, client disconnects and having to reconnect 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 times, and general stability issues, and the overall size of the pipe, which, you know, we all collectively bought for 5 or 6 or 10 or 20 users, and suddenly we had 300 or 400 trying to use them at the same time, we pushed VPN well beyond its intended use. We discovered that IT infrastructure that works in an office doesn't always work well across remote VPN. You know, where folks had, say, some applications where they did some local processing and some database interaction calls. Well, it's one thing when the database you're interacting with is a millisecond away or sub-millisecond away there on the corporate network. Something else entirely when, well, let's face it, coming from the least secure networks on the planet, namely the home network, over a VPN connection that's already saturated, and milliseconds can turn into seconds. Suddenly, some applications, some ways of doing business just didn't work that well. Kind of have had to start rethinking how we do things. Now, a second ago, I mentioned home networks. Let's face it, the least secure networks on the face of planet Earth, the home networks. Series of recent studies, because everybody's looking at this stuff these days, discovered that the average home network, about 73% of them, has some form of malware already existing on a device in it. And we just connected our pristine corporate networks and pristine company data and infrastructure. We pushed those out to encompass those home networks as well. Let's face it, regardless of whether or not you shipped a hardened device, air quotes hardened, out to that home user, it's hitting their network and everything attached to it before it even fires up that VPN client. It was exactly the wrong thing to do. We also discovered, on a much more positive note, that remote work actually can work. In a lot of cases, even better than in office. Let's face it, when you're not wasting 2 or 3 hours commuting each way every day with all of the drama that that entails, but rather can roll out of bed and the longest traffic light you've got is the one at the coffee machine before you head into your home office. You can get a whole lot more done with a whole lot less distraction. Productivity, well, all those that said it shouldn't be done or fought like hell to keep work from remote, work from anywhere from happening, they've been in a lot of ways proven wrong and starting to see the light. So, what were some of the takeaway lessons from the last 8 months? What did we learn? Well, complete VDI implementation, if it had already been in place, would have been a huge help. Properly implemented VDI doesn't need things like VPNs. But at the end of the day, for years, the pundits, the analysts, etc., have been saying it's the year of VDI. You know what it never was? The year of VDI. You see, VDI has historically always been too complex, too expensive, too many moving parts, too much licensing from too many vendors to make sense for the vast majority of companies that are even starting to think about digital transition, digital transformation. But for those that did already have it, switching over to working remotely, I hate to say it, but it was almost a walk in the park. Now, the problems with legacy VDI, it was never designed for the SMB. It was never designed for the mid-market. It was never designed for the distributed enterprise. It was designed for the hallowed halls of the Fortune 50, for the companies that less concerned about the cost of endpoint devices and much more concerned about security and control plane stuff. VDI had targeted not cost containment, even though some questionable sales guys like to talk about it in that context back then, but rather a security play, a control play. The way they went about it, horrifically complex. You look at some of the reference diagrams from these things, and after you're done with the migraine they cause trying to follow them all, you kind of step back and go, wow, that's just too much. And you saw that carried out in the marketplace by the simple fact that it was never the year of VDI. Well, until about 8 months ago. So the alternatives people were looking at were, cloud-first approaches, whether it's WVD or any of those end-user computing in the cloud approaches. We also discovered how incredibly expensive, time-consuming, entire lift and shift of the end-user computing environment to cloud is. And quite frankly, it's still the cloud. It's a Chinese finger trap. Easy to get into, terrific to get out of. Doesn't do a terribly great job of putting compute where it needs to be, when it needs to be there. So while it was fine for some, not so great for others. Yep. Really looking at the kind of infrastructure that we had historically, servers plus switches, SAN plus hypervisor plus DR componentry, etc. That was the infrastructure that underpinned those same legacy VDI players. We also discovered very, very quickly that it didn't scale anywhere near as easily or rapidly as it should to accommodate sudden shifts in need. Suddenly shifting to 90% of my workforce is in-house to 95% of my workforce is not anywhere near in-house. They didn't keep up terribly well. Now, a lot of folks have gone down the HCI route already, regardless of which vendor you're talking about. Those were the ones that realized that when you have an HCI-based foundation, that works hand in glove to make VDI an order of magnitude easier to either roll out or scale up or scale out to match requirements really, really quickly. Think of HCI as foundational to doing a really strong VDI implementation, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Now, next bullet point here, cyber threats. Back to that home network. Stop and think about this. In just the month of March, March 13th, when things really started locking down to the end of the end of that month, cyber attacks, ransomware attacks, malware attacks jumped 147%. But you know what they were targeting? Home networks. Reason why? Because the black hats, the bad actors, they knew that IT was going to respond by creating that pipeline directly into all of those relatively insecure home networks. We tripled, quadrupled, and then quadrupled again the attack surface they had to hammer their way into companies like Garmin, cities of, counties of. You've all seen the results firsthand over just the last few months. It is without a doubt the most important thing you do when you implement VDI to implement real security, but do it in a way that is easy to implement, autonomous. Get to how in a minute. Now, not all gloom and doom here. We successfully got most businesses still moving right along. But the one thing we need to do now, implement business resilience. Business resilience is a large topic. Get into it in just a second. But, for those companies that already had prior to March, they barely noticed. But for those who didn't, now it would be good too. So let's take a look at what business resilience means, because VDI is a core component of it. Now, you can read the textbook definition just as well as I can, so I'm not going to sit here and read it to you. But at the end of the day, what it really is all about is creating an infrastructure for yourself that's cost effective, that absolutely right out of the gate enables you to grow as needed, that you don't need to be a VCP and a CCNE and a SNIA certified storage engineer to be able to spin up, make go, that you can immediately get value from, that allows business to continue no matter what, no matter from where, no matter how, that makes things as ubiquitous as a web browser you find on everything. So let's take a look at what the actual components, the interwoven technologies are to building a business resilience strategy for your organization. Now, first and foremost, HCI, hyperconverged infrastructure. This is important. This is foundational. You build the foundation before you build the front doors and shutters. Because no matter how good your VDI infrastructure, your security infrastructure is, if you build it on kind of the loosey-goosey legacy inverted pyramid of doom style infrastructure of stacks of servers and switches and hypervisors and, you're building a house on sand. Having that highly available, scalable infrastructure, that's key. Now, VDI, being able to, and VDI might even be something of an overused term, but I want you to think about this. What VDI is really all about is connecting authenticated users to their workflows, no matter where they're coming in from, doing it simply, easily, quickly, safely, without having to retrain a non-technical workforce with nobody to sit over their shoulder because they're remote and say, oh no, now you click over here. It has to be intuitive. Ransomware protection. And I would expand this to be more than just ransomware. Ransomware, malware, crypto mining, cryptojacking, take your pick. All of the above have skyrocketed. Now, I'm sure all of you watch the news. I'm sure all of you read the trade regs from LREG to you name it. We all know what's going on in the ransomware space. Any of you that have a Garmin know firsthand. It was down for what, a week and change? Millions of dollars they paid to back out of that. Those are headline-grabbing events. Large cities of 26 cities in Texas in one event. But at the end of the day, a business resilience strategy that includes that work from anywhere mentality, machination, it needs that level of modern threat protection. Now, I'm actually kind of going to conjoin these last two bullets, ransomware, backup, and DR. Because at the end of the day, they're at least logically the same thing, just spawning from newer threats. Just because phishing attacks are up through the roof and going all the way back to 4 years ago, famous phishing attacks, still getting suckered in left and right. Just because those exist doesn't mean the construction dude with the backhoe didn't accidentally just trench through the internet line to your main facility. Just because there's new threats, growing threats, doesn't mean the legacy threats went away. So you want a protection package in place that covers the gamut, that gets data off platform, gets data off site, that can take advantage of putting data on any storage, that can get runtime off platform if needed. You want it to be cost effective. You want it to be autonomous. You want it to be easy to implement, easy to use, easy to grow. You want it to not cost a king's ransom. Well, let's dive in. Business resilience in the scale world. My recipe. This is what my customers have been implementing for the last 2-3 years. And it conjoins all of the above. Highly available, highly fault-tolerant infrastructure that can lose any component anywhere at any time and just keeps going. Yeah, we've demonstrated standing our clusters up live in Spiceworks events, 18 minutes from into the rack to carving VMs, highly available VMs. Lose any drive anywhere, lose any entire node anywhere. It doesn't matter, things just keep going. Work from anywhere, whether that's connecting people to VDI instances, application servers, connecting people to the physical desktops stranded behind at the desk they're no longer going to. Pushing it out via your choice of protocols, whatever's appropriate for what they're going into and what they're coming in from, and what level of trust you have in them. Maybe you want to send them an RDP or remote FX session directly. Maybe you just want to send them an HTML5 session so that that interface is reflected in a browser. There's a really good reason to do that too. You know, let's face it, HTML5 browsers, they don't run in kernel space, they run in user space. When you simply reflect a desktop session, an end user computing session into a browser remotely, no matter what is infecting that remote site, that home network, it's already firewalled off from your resources, your pristine corporate infrastructure. That end user's device can literally go up in smoke. They can send their fresh cup of coffee sailing right across the top of it. Not going to matter. Toss it in the trash. Grab your kid's 10-inch Barbie tablet. Fire it up. Point the browser right back at your gateway. Bang! You're right where you left off. Browsers are ubiquitous. Cybersecurity and backup. Again, I'm conjoining these two because they're two heads of the same hydra. Think about this. What good is access if you aren't protected? That's the diciest proposition in the history of ever. It's only slightly more nerve-wracking than grabbing every laptop you can and shoving VPN connections into the least secure networks on Earth. Protect it. Protect your infrastructure. Finally, make it scalable. Lego bricks meet data center. I need to grow this. I need to ramp that up. Click, snap, done. Keep it moving. So let's talk through the individual pieces of the recipe. Now, a bunch of you already know who Scale is. Heck, Scale has so many customers already in the Spiceworks world. Ask any of them. They'll tell you exactly what it's like. But long story made agonizingly short, that inverted pyramid of doom that I've been talking about is right there on the left. That's the same way we did virtualization for 20 plus years until HCI came along. With HC3, when we brought it together all the way back in 2010, took it to the analyst crowd back in 2011, said, look at what we've created. It was actually an analyst that coined the term hyperconverged in the modern sense of it in that meeting in 2011, specifically to describe what we'd created with HC3. I know, I was in the meeting. But what we've created is a clean sheet of paper approach to how highly available virtual infrastructure should have been done in the first place. One that doesn't include the wild overhead and inefficiency of the legacy approach to virtualization. Has all of the capability stack, but it's an infrastructure that you could literally take a kid straight out of the local community college still waving around his A+ cert like he's the first human to ever get one. Able to take that guy, drop him down in front of a cluster still in the box. He can rack, stack, cable it up, hand out IPs, and hit the go button. Carve VMs, set up DR, do live migrations, failovers, failbacks without needing more than about 15 minutes worth of UI familiarization. That's what HC3 is. That's why I said it's foundational. It's step one in building out that work from anywhere environment. Now, obviously, and I'm probably going to give this screen a slip, but to borrow a phrase from the post office, if it fits, it ships. If it's x86, if it runs on Intel, guess what? It runs on us just fine. Let's move on to part 2 of that recipe, VDI. Now, I kind of railed and went on a tangent for a minute there about the complexities inherent in legacy VDI. Here's some of their reference architectures. And notice I included over there on the left the inverted pyramid of doom. Reason for that simple. All of the rest of these guys built their stacks, these horrifically complex stacks, to run on top of that thing. So you've got all of the complexity and cost associated with the underlying foundation, and then layer on all of the above, the incumbent vendors, on top of that. It starts to become really, 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 really clear why VDI will to ever get traction. Well, here at Scale, you might have noticed we have this mentality that says perfection is not attained. There's nothing left to add, but rather nothing left to remove without losing any functionality. In that spirit of simplification, that's exactly what we chose to do. Implement VDI, but make it simple. Make it something that you can take from, I've got my infrastructure up and running, to I'm connecting end users to physical desktops, to virtual machines, etc., no matter where they are, in less than an hour. 2 virtual machines, all it requires. A connection broker that knows how to talk to Duo, that knows how to talk to your Active Directory, or your LDAP, your NIS, your NIS+, whatever your authentication mechanism is. That knows how to talk to the Scale clusters themselves at an API level. Identify golden master images. Run and manage their entire life cycle. When to spin them up, when to spin them down, when to delete them and create new ones, etc. All from one VM. And a second VM that acts as a gateway, so that you can port forward whatever port you feel most secure with to port 443 on that gateway. Why is that important? So that your users, no matter where they are in the world, can point any device, anything with a browser. And that's not hyperbole, by the way. I've had guys send me pictures of connecting to their desktops, their workflows, etc., from their smart fridges, from their Teslas, from their Peloton exercise bikes. And have that gateway talk directly to the connection broker, publish agents out, create pools, and connect workers to workflows. Simple. Oh, and roughly half the cost of those legacy guys. Paraphrase Eddie Murphy. Half, Eddie. Think that one in. Now, I skipped over this. But this, I think, really, we've talked about it already, but this just really reinforces why leveraging VPN, why laying your hands on piles of laptops, why lifting and shifting workloads to the cloud, etc., was just exactly the wrong thing to do. The right thing to do was to leverage modern VDI plumbing to make access from anywhere just happen. Now, let's do this. Again, I've conjoined parts 3 and 4 of the recipe here, because to my mind, they really are the same thing. And we talked about this already. Ransomware attacks, those malware attacks, they are through the roof, climbing like mad. A VPN provider less than a week and a half ago got compromised. 973 separate company servers, VPN servers, all compromised. Every single bit of credentials that flew bidirectionally across those or was used to log into them has now been compromised. Using VPN to enable work from home writ large is a little like trying to use a toy fork as a screwdriver. It's just never a good idea. It might work sort of, but things are gonna break. So because of that, because we understand that VDI is more than just remote access, it's part of a larger business resilience strategy. Several years ago, we here at Scale partnered with ACRONIS. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't the first, oh yeah, let's talk to these guys. But rather it was part of a multi-year effort that we undertook here at Scale to find exactly the right partner to do the things that we wanted to do beyond what we build in to HC3. We build a lot of the DR componentry just in and doesn't cost you anything extra. But we wanted to be able to extend that functionality into the cyber realm as well. It was long before COVID ever was a thought. The ACRONIS does things that are fundamentally interesting. Backup is table stakes. Being to back up your data, and by backup I mean that in the traditional sense, being able to get a copy of your data, your workloads, etc., off platform. That's table stakes. Anybody can do that, and everybody talks about it. ACRONIS and Scale, that meant that suddenly you could get those workloads, that data, those data sets, those data structures, to any storage anywhere of any kind. Whether you want to send it up to Glacier or use up those Azure credits that you got with your O365 subscription, or, you know what, I've got a home-rolled NAS Supermicro box I piled a bunch of 18 terabyte drives into. Have a good time. It'll happily use it. Or maybe that old SpectraLogic tape library in the corner. It'll happily use it too. It'll actually use all four at the same time. But at the end of the day, the piece that is just telling beyond all else, the ransomware protections they've absolutely built in for years. What that is, agentless versus agent-based is kind of a religious war in the IT world. They do both. They do both on HC3. Matter of fact, there's no extra charge no matter which way you want to go. But when you push the agents in, via domain policy, through a mask policy in their UI, etc., those agents do more than just facilitate backups. See, it's not 2006 anymore. Those agents start learning what's normal for the workload they're running in. For example, a 2012 server running SQLs never encrypted a thing in its life. That agent sitting there in it, when it sees suddenly this subdirectory structure is being encrypted, it identifies that action, discovers, hey, that's not normal. identifies the process. It's already running kernel adjacent. It identifies the process actually doing that action, isolates it, kills it, and then automatically rolls that entire now encrypted subdirectory structure back cache without you having to get involved, without you having to even think about it. Now, you maintain total granular control over the thing. They make it so you don't have to think about it. Critical in today's world. You got enough to think about. You know, let's do this. I actually happen to have a video of this in action.
Imagine an employee who receives a very tempting email that is offering insider information about a very popular television program that I'm sure you're familiar with, unless you've been hiding under a rock. The email has an attachment, and once loaded, delivers its payload to the computer. The WannaCry immediately starts encrypting all the files on the machine. The encrypted files cannot be viewed, edited, or even restored manually. Next, the desktop wallpaper is changed to display a very threatening message, and this is followed up with a pop-up window demanding to pay ransom and a countdown clock. If the ransom isn't paid timely, the files can be lost forever. Now let's rewind and do it again with our flagship ACRONIS Backup 12.5 installed and the ACRONIS Active Protection feature turned on. Again, our unfortunate employee gets that tasty TV show email and attempts to open the attachment. The WannaCry virus storms to encrypt all the data. However, this time, the ACRONIS Active Protection detects the undesirable encryption, stops it, and displays the alert similar to this in the ACRONIS Backup 12.5 console. The system then automatically reverts all the files that the virus was able to encrypt, so our employee may not have even noticed that something happened.
I'm a huge believer in seeing is believing. Don't tell me, trust me, but let me see it myself. That's why I shared that video with you. But again, you don't have to take my word for any of this. This is all well documented. And it's why it's part of that business resilience strategy that Scale's bringing to the table for you. It's an infrastructure that lets you put what you need, where you need, how you need, at a price point that makes sense for the SMB, the mid-market, for the distributed enterprise, all the way down to the edge. You know, just about 8 months ago, Scale introduced our own edge devices, tiny little things, based on Intel NUC, the HE150. This exact same virtual infrastructure, this exact same stack, connection brokers and all, happily runs all the way down on things that small. See, when you create an infrastructure like we did with HC3, it's one thing to know price that makes sense regardless of whether your needs are at the edge, fog, core, or the cloud. And we integrate all of the above all the way through, so that once you know HC3, you know it on all of them. This infrastructure allows you to roll out disaster recovery strategies no matter what, no matter where. We fit any size deployment. Self-healing, self-load balancing can lose any component anywhere at any time. Our storage stack, nothing even comes close. That legacy approach of object files on file systems on object files on file systems mapped over network fabrics on top of the overhead of storage protocols to object files sitting on RAIDs. None of that exists with us. We don't need it. There's a better way that's an order of magnitude more efficient. We found it, and our customers have been using it for the better part of a decade. Efficiency, that carries through to more than just our storage stack. Literally, we don't need those CVMs or VSAs, Minikube Federation Managers. We don't have them. We don't need them. We have all of the capabilities that they bring to the table and some of the things that they can't. But what that really translates to is we don't throw away 30% of the infrastructure resource on our own overhead. An average scale cluster uses less than 4 gig of RAM per node for its own overhead. Compare that to the other HCI players in the space that start their consumption at 24 gig. Hell, I've seen it go as high as 150 gig of RAM per node in their infrastructures. We use less than 1/10 of a single core. Support is not offshored or outsourced. We don't hire help desk or tier 1 script readers, but rather only actual degreed engineers that know what they're doing. We built call home directly in. Cloud integration native in HyperCore in HC3 with GCP. But we take it a step further, like we do with everything with scale, so that your instance is running on Google. We've already implemented layer 2 VXLAN overlay. That translates to they're participating in your local network. You need to fail a workload from here to the cloud. There's no DNS to repoint. There's no networking changes of any kind. You literally, with a couple of clicks, can move your entire on-prem infrastructure into runtime on Google without having to change or repoint anything. No expertise required at any level. Now, some people go, but wait a minute, I've spent years learning this, that, and the other thing, and that's great, because that speaks to your intelligence capability and problem-solving abilities. But you know what's greater than that? Not wasting those things on being stuck in the data center at 2 in the morning trying to figure out which cable got unplugged or which power supply went up in smoke. When you implement this kind of self-healing infrastructure, this kind of architecture, you literally put yourself in a position of being able to concentrate your time, effort, and energy on things that move the business forward rather than chasing down the mundane. Now, let's do this. You've heard me talk about all of these things. Here's some graphic examples. Edge to fog to core to cloud. But at the end of the day, one of the most important things is support, and you know that. And we built an architecture that inherently tolerates faults and failures, that doesn't need things like virtual machine manager, doesn't need things like Rev Manager, doesn't have or need a vCenter server, physical or virtual, doesn't need a third base coach management stack. Our nodes talk directly to each other. But as that relates to support, that means that things that historically panic-driven are non-events in the scale world. But we wanted to go beyond that. You see, we sat and took a nice long look at how folks in the industry, companies in the industry, treated support. First year they might throw in for free. Year 2 was a little pricier. Year 3 starting to get expensive. Year 4, year 5, you could buy an entire new SAN or a new set of servers for what they wanted for support renewals. We didn't want to play those games. They also love to do things like sell support contracts at different levels. Lead, copper, gold, silver, platinum, unobtainium. The limited, Bob can only talk to support between the hours of 11 and midnight on the 3rd Friday of every month. Don't play those games either. Every scale customer gets 24/7, 365 support from real, actual engineers. Don't take up your time or your desktop to do it. We built Call Home directly into every single cluster we've ever sold. Trevor Pott, he's a analyst It's for the Reg and a few others, referred to our support group as data center butlers, because that's exactly what we aspire to them being. Guys that just make it happen, an extension of your force. And not playing the sliding scale cost game either. Year 2, year 7, costs the same. The flat rate, say like 12% of the cost of the node or something like that. Now you find scale in places you wouldn't think of. I'll just let you sit and soak some of those in. Royal Court of Bahrain, City of London, there's a reason I mentioned them. You ever bought those little Lindor round chocolate candies? Little red wrapped ones you find at the local drugstore or grocery store? That company standardized on scale almost a decade ago. You find this everywhere. You just didn't know it. Now, interestingly enough, we are one of the most highly rated, highly reviewed infrastructure companies out there. Don't take my word for any of this. Whether you're looking at Spiceworks, Trust Radius, Tech Validate, hell, even Gartner. See for yourself. All there. There is one award I'm really, really proud of, the CRN ARC Award. Up until 2019, that thing had consistently been owned by the usual suspects. Dell EMC, VMware, HP. Dell EMC, VMware, HP. Over and over again. We have absolutely swept it. HCI, Edge, for the last 2 years in a row. So with that, David, let's take some questions.
All right, yes. We have some questions already, and just a reminder to everyone, you can continue to submit those questions at any time, and we'll get to as many as we can. So let's look at this first question. Does Scale support VMware ESXi natively on the HC3 appliance now?
Scale and our underlying OS, HyperCore, completely replaces VMware. We can import their virtual machines, run them better than they could, but we do it without any of their licensing cost or overhead. We've also spent the last several years building out our own ecosystem across the board. Next question here.
All right, let's look at this next one. How long does it take to get the VDI solution up and working from start to finish?
I wasn't kidding, and it wasn't hyperbole when I said less than an hour. The reason I know this, I was working with college in Chicago the day before lockdown happened. The day lockdown happened at 5 o'clock that evening. That sysadmin called me up at 9 o'clock in the morning and said, I've got wind this is coming and I need to implement something right now. Now, he happened to have a Scale cluster already. He downloaded the connection broker package from me, just on a trial basis. Stood up the connection broker, stood up the gateway, did that port forward from a URL they have that was web-facing. Published the same agent that you put into your golden images out to physical desktops in the environment, just with a domain policy. Less than an hour. Less than an hour. It's actually about 48 minutes, start to finish. And he had his users connecting via their web browsers from home. Some of them, he left their entire desktop sitting inside that browser window. Others, he flipped on RDP for Remote FX. For guys that were connecting to their Macs left behind in the office, flipped on VNC. Use the protocol that's appropriate. They're all supported.
All right. Let's look at this next question from T. Walker. Do Scale snapshots support domain controllers as of yet? We currently have 2012 R2 domain controllers and learned that they were not supported for recovery, but heard it was in the works.
If you're talking about VSS ware snapshots, yes, if you've pushed the Scale agent into your virtual machine at the same time that you push in your support for pair virtualized NICs, etc., then our snapshot mechanism calls the inherent internal to Windows snapshot mechanism to quiesce first. So that becomes quiesced, then we take our snapshot. So you have those VSS aware snaps. Those are in place and have been for a little while now. Now, I see one question here. John 2350, any issues with getting audio over VDI? So John, I'm going to show you something firsthand. Don't usually see in these. So right here, you're looking at my Scale cluster. Okay? What's interesting about this Scale cluster, nothing special, 3-node hybrid cluster, is this virtual machine right here. You see, I don't just talk about things, I use them. I've used VDI on Scale for the last 2.5 years for 100% of my workflows. And as a matter of fact, I'm talking to you and giving you this presentation through a VDI instance running on my Scale cluster right now. My voice is coming to you over audio on said VDI instance. So hopefully that answers your question in a way that's pretty straightforward.
All right, great answer there. Thank you, Alan. Let's look at a question from George. Only one app is keeping my office from being 100% VDI. Do you believe more apps will be adopting virtual options?
I'd want to understand more about what that app is, George, and see if there isn't a way that I can help you with that. And I'm not meaning that from a salesy perspective, but just from a IT guy that's been doing this stuff a very long time perspective. At the end of this, I'm going to include my personal email address, the one I actually pay attention to as opposed to the public one that gets hammered with lots and lots of spam requests. Reach out to me. Let's talk about it. See if we can't straighten that out for you.
All right, thanks, Alan. Another question. We have probably time for another 2 questions here. How long, let me go back to this question. Any testing done with Login VSI for your VDI implementation?
Well, yeah, actually, Login VSI is the de facto standard when you're talking about VDI performance and sizing operations. It just is. And I don't care whose VDI you're talking about, whether it's Horizon or Citrix, workspaces, Zen Desktop, Zen App, doesn't matter. It is the default for testing performance and sizing in those environments. We do it too. We've run it on things as small as those HE150 clusters. Oddly enough, we discovered the little tiny 3-node cluster that you can literally fit in your pockets gets to 25 task workers, office workers, before it even gets close to VSI Max. That on a run-of-the-mill data center node, 1250, 3-node cluster there happily holding, and we're not talking all flash or cranked up on processor options or cranked up on RAM, happily holding about 125, 130 users before getting close to VSI Max. So, absolutely.
All right. Great. Looks like SBH 1960 has a question about USB devices connected to the local machine. Will it work over the VDI solution?
As a matter of fact, absolutely. The headset that I'm using for audio, that's being USB port forwarded. So is the webcam that is tied into the thick client I'm using as a thin client. to talk to my VDI instance. Okay? USB over IP has been all kinds of there in the VDI space for quite some time. Now, you will find a few oddball things that happen, not just with Scale, but with any VDI approach with peripheral devices. Take the time to test them. No matter which approach you wind up wanting to take or investigate, take the time to discover what your users are actually using from a peripheral devices perspective. Take a minute and test them. USB forwarding from a console, from a thin client to thick client, that's table stakes. And it works really well, as you can hear in my voice. But when you get into the esoterica, where you need to pay attention.
All right. Well, Alan, we're coming up on time. I want to kind of let you have, give it back to you for a couple of more slides, and then we'll wrap up.
Okay. Well, let me do this. I don't want to take up everybody's time. So I'm just going to simply show you this. It's not about what you need with Scale, but it's really about what you don't need. Let that soak in. No VMware licensing, SAN, no storage protocols, no management servers. You don't need to be a PhD. This is something your average Windows admin can stand up in a weekend, and we can move those workloads over from whatever they were coming from ESX or Hyper-V or physical servers or whatever. We can move them in with them still up and running. Giving you your weekends back. Letting you sleep better. At the end of the day, that's what all this is about. And pulling things like business resilience together for you so that when things like this past March happen, non-event. That being said, guys, thanks for taking the time. Promised. There's that email address. Feel free.
Great, and thank you, Alan, for providing your information. So everyone, just make sure you can make note of that if you want to follow up with Alan. I do want to thank you, Alan, for the great presentation, full of a lot of great content and the video. So thank you for going through all of that. And special thanks to Scale Computing for sponsoring this webinar. I will let y'all know that Tiffany will be putting in the winner of our contest in the chat section. So take a look there, and congrats to our winner. And also want to remind everyone, you can view this on demand. So you'll get a link in about a day, and you can review anything that you may have missed. With that, I want to thank everyone for attending. We look forward to another partner webinar soon with all of you. So until then, everyone, stay safe and keep it spicy. Take care, everyone.